This lecture is going to look at some classic examples from game theory. First up is our public goods game. On this, what you do is you have a number of people within a group all playing the same game. And what you can do is you can submit some amount of points or dollars or whatever we're playing with. Let's say you could submit anywhere between $0 and $10 that you start off with at the start of the experiment. If I started you off with this money, every amount that you submitted you would no longer have. However, within a public goods game, what happens is that the person running the experiment takes all of the money that is contributed, and that money we could say is contributed anonymously, and we pool the total points. We double the points that were contributed or the dollars that were contributed, and then we divide the outcome equally among all of the players within the group. So what would be the best case scenario is that if everybody donated all of their money to the pool, and then all of that money got doubled and was redistributed back out evenly, and everybody would end up with $20. However, this is not the outcome that we see in public goods games. The group payoff might be maximized when everybody contributes all their points. However, the pure strategy Nash equilibria pay is for no contribution whatsoever. You are optimizing holding everyone else's actions constant if you contribute absolutely nothing. What would happen then is that you contribute nothing, so you maximize the amount of money that you keep, and you cannot control what everybody else does at all, and so you will still get the same amount of money split up based on what everybody else contributes to the game, and then is multiplied by 2 and divided equally. If you put any money into this game, what happens is it gets multiplied by 2, but then split up amongst the many number of players that exist. So say there's 10 players within this game, your contribution gets doubled, but then divided by 10. That will necessarily be smaller than the amount of money if you just kept it. So holding everyone else constant, your best contribution is to contribute nothing whatsoever. This is Nash play within a public goods game, but Nash play is rarely seen in experiments. In actual studies like this, even in one-shot games where we have anonymous individuals, agents contribute about 40 to 60% of the socially optimal level. Public goods games are a staple in experimental literature and discussions about political economy. The pure strategy Nash equilibrium is 0, but people don't always play that way. The rational play is to play nothing, though. Next up is a coordination game. Here, you and a partner are simultaneously choosing within a game and looking at different payoffs. So let's look at a basic coordination game setup. It's a simultaneous payoff where 2 players need to coordinate their actions. So we could imagine a coordination game like this. We can think of a classic coordination game of you both having to play left or both having to play right. As long as you match up, you get some positive payoff and you're happy. And so within this game, we can think about what happens, and we would have a pure strategy Nash equilibria concept. Player 1 would choose to play left if player 2 does play left, and player 2 would choose to play left if player 1 did play left. Player 1 would choose to play right if player 2 does, and player 2 would choose to play right if player 1 did. In both situations, neither player would want to move, holding the other actors constant, so both of these options, left-left and right-right, would be pure strategy Nash equilibria. On this next version of the coordination game, we're going to have a little bit different payoffs for coordinating. Left-left pays 3-3 and right-right pays 5-5. Everybody would like to move to right-right, but what we're going to do is in this game, we're going to assume that player 2 knows with absolute certainty that for some reason, player 1 is playing left. What should player 2 do if they know that player 1 is going to play left? Well, if they know that player 1 is going to play left, player 2 should play left also. This would be a pure strategy Nash equilibria, an outcome of the game that kind of makes sense. We would get payoffs of 3 for player 1 and 3 for player 2. The main idea here to note, however, is that this outcome of 3-3, this kind of thing can happen. It is possible for people to get locked into what we would call Pareto inferior equilibria. This is an equilibrium. 3-3 is a pure strategy Nash equilibria, and we could get locked into it if we knew that one of the players was going to play left. Pure strategy Nash equilibria and Pareto are two different standards. This is a pure strategy Nash equilibria, 3-3, but it is Pareto inferior. Both people could be made better off without one person being made worse off. And so it does not hold up to the standards of Pareto efficiency, and it is thus called Pareto inferior to the outcome of 5-5. The Pareto superior would be such that all members of the group prefer this outcome to some other outcome. Thus, 5-5 in this case is Pareto superior. Pareto optimal would be that no other possible outcome is Pareto superior to this outcome. So 5-5 is Pareto superior to 3-3, and it is the Pareto optimal point because no other possible outcome is Pareto superior to this outcome. The path dependence literature in economics uses this concept extensively, that we could get locked in to a Pareto inferior outcome. But is there a way out? Some equilibria within coordination games are in some sense more obvious than others. Problems like this lead us naturally to the notion of focal or Schelling points. Thomas Schelling had a classic example about New York City. Imagine at some point in time during the year, at some time of the day, at some location in New York City, you had to coordinate with somebody and meet up with them. Where would it be? What time would it be? And on what day of the year? We could make things a little bit easier and say, it's summertime. But even still, a lot of people will say July 4th, or some people will say January 1st. Right? But a lot of times, if we narrowed it just a little bit to, say, the summer example, we get to July 4th. At what time would you meet someone? Well, there's a lot of different hours and minutes during the day, but it turns out that most people say noon. And again, we could say, well, what location in New York City? When Thomas Schelling gave this famous example, he had a lot of people would say Grand Central Station. Since then, things have changed in our perceptions of what New York City is and how much we see it on TV and other places have changed. And now a lot of people would say Times Square. Well, isn't it weird from all of the places in New York and all of the days in the middle of summer that we could meet and all of the times, the hours and minutes that we could possibly have, that somehow we would find a way to actually coordinate and end up with the same day, time, and place. The fact that it's even remotely possible for us to do this is kind of interesting. Why is this possible? Well, because all of these elements that I gave, say January 1st or July 4th or noon, right, are much more focal than saying at 3:43 a.m. we should meet up. Or at saying, well, on the corner of 47th and 16th. Right? Instead, we go to something that is much more focal. Sometimes these focal points are referred to as Schelling points, as Thomas Schelling made this idea famous as a solution concept to thinking about coordination games. Think of this squares example here. Which square would you choose? A lot of times, coordination games that are thinking about focal points create some kind of setup like this, and then reveal, your payoffs would be great if you all chose the red square. It's very focal. The other three, the blue squares, not so much. So if we bring that idea of Schelling points or focal points back to our coordination game with different payoffs here, and now both players are free to act We haven't done this experiment before where we were locked into left. We just see this game in front of us and both players are simultaneously choosing. Well, which one is the focal point? Well, the 5-5 sticks out like a sore thumb to me. Obviously, I would want 5, and obviously you would want 5, and so we will go to that one. Both the 3-3 and the 5-5 are pure strategy Nash equilibria, but the focalness of the 5-5 leads us often to be able to coordinate and get out of any potential path-dependent problems where we get locked in to Pareto inferior outcomes. Next up is the classic Battle of the Sexes game. Here again, we will play a modified version of a coordination game called a Battle of the Sexes game. What you do is you imagine a couple that agreed to meet this evening, but cannot recall if they will be attending the opera or a football game. The fact that they forgot is common knowledge. They're both aware that they both forgot. The husband really wants to go to the football game, and the wife really would like to attend the opera. Both would prefer to go to the same place and be together rather than be in different ones. If they can't communicate, though, where should they go? Well, we can imagine the payoffs of such a game. Here we see the husband's payoff for choosing football and having his wife choose football also is that the husband's payoff is 6. The wife is happy about this, but her payoff is only 4. The wife would love to choose to go to the opera and have the husband to choose to go to the opera as well, and then her payoff is 6, whereas the husband's is just 4. Both of them would prefer to go to their preferred destination, either the opera or the football, but they really want to coordinate. They really want to go to the same thing. If the husband attends the opera and the wife goes to the football game, they both get 0. Likewise, if the wife attends the opera and the husband goes to the football game, they both get 0 also. They need to coordinate somehow or another. Well, how do we play this game? This game has a solution concept of 2 pure strategy Nash equilibria. Both of the diagonals will be pure strategy Nash equilibria. No one would want to move holding the other actors constant. If the wife goes to the football game and she finds the husband there, she does not want to leave for the opera. And so we have these 2 pure strategy Nash equilibria, but neither of them is focal here. And so what they end up doing is playing a mixed strategy. With 2 pure strategy Nash equilibria, the mixed strategy is a situation where the players go to their preferred event a little bit more often than the other, and the proportion of their mixed play between sometimes choosing the opera and sometimes choosing football depends on the payoffs. Right? If the payoffs are more extreme where you really want to go to the football game as opposed to the opera, your mixed play is going to show up this way. So the more different our payoffs are, the more we're going to have miscoordinations because each person is going to be playing their preference. So if the difference is between the payoffs is symmetric, and yet it's 6 and 4 if we get it my way, and 4 and 6 if we get it your way, well, we'll kind of play a pretty even mix. But if instead the payoffs are 60 versus 4, and 4 versus 60, right? Then all of a sudden, whoa, okay, I am going to want to go to the football game a whole bunch if I could potentially get 60 in my payoff. Whereas if I meet up with you and I go to the opera, well, I'm only getting 4 anyway. It's not really worth it that much. The mix that I am going to play is going to be more heavily geared towards playing football. This presents an interesting case for game theory since each of the Nash equilibria is deficient in some way. The two pure strategy Nash equilibria seem to be unfair. One player consistently does better than the other. However, the mixed strategy play, when we mix our play and we get the mixed strategy Nash equilibrium, that's inefficient. The players will miscoordinate around half of the time, maybe more, depending on the payoffs. If the payoffs are more extreme, we miss each other more often leaving each player with an expected return less than the return one would receive from constantly going to one's less favored event. The experimental evidence from playing these battle of sexes games is quite interesting. Subjects generally do fail to coordinate. Focal points, repeated play, and communication can help us escape this coordination problem. But here, in the battle of sexes game, without any kind of focal point, we're kind of left to, well, just play that mixed strategy, and we often fail. Next up is probably the most known game within game theory economics, the prisoner's dilemma. Within the prisoner's dilemma, we have payoffs such as this. We have a situation where player 1 and player 2 act simultaneously, and their payoffs from cooperating are strictly dominated from not cooperating, yet the overall cooperate outcome is Pareto superior to the Pareto inferior dominant strategy. Why is the dominant strategy Pareto inferior? Well, we get this strict dominance Pareto inferior outcome because both people act independently, simultaneously, and they do what's in their own best interest, even though it leads to an outcome that overall makes things worse off. How does that possibly happen? Both players decide, should I cooperate or not when being interrogated about a potential crime? Should I turn my fellow comrade in? Or do I go along and, stick to the game plan where we said, hey, we're not going to kind of tattle on each other here. And, then the police won't have very much evidence on us. And we'll be able to go away pretty much scot-free. And we'll end up both pretty happy from this outcome and getting 5 and 5. Why doesn't this happen? Well, if we think about player 1's options, player 1 can sit here and say, okay, well, I can choose between 5 and 8, and 0 and 1. Right? Well, no matter what player 2 does, if player 2 cooperates, 8's better than 5. If player 2 doesn't cooperate, 1 is better than 0. So no matter what player 2 does, it doesn't matter if they cooperate or don't, I am better off not cooperating. Right? So as player 1, no matter what player 2 does, and I can't control player 2, I'm not going to cooperate. Now that player 1 is not cooperating, we can think about player 2. What would player 2 do? Well, player 2 has this choice then between a payoff of 0 or a payoff of 1, and obviously they will choose a payoff of 1, and we end up with this 1-1 outcome where we don't cooperate. We could have done it the other way and looked at player 2's choices from the get-go. Player 2's choices, what is it? Strictly dominant, don't cooperate. Right? 8 is better than 5, and 0 is worse than 1. So in both cases, we would like to not cooperate as player 2. Both players, player 1 and player 2, are going to not cooperate, and we end up at this 1-1. Cooperate just simply isn't in their choice set here, even though it is Pareto superior to the 1-1 outcome. A nice little example of a prisoner's dilemma game is when you're waiting for your luggage at the airport and there's a big crowd around a small luggage carousel. What could happen is that everybody could stand about 6 feet back from the luggage carousel, identify their luggage, step up to the carousel, pull it off, and walk away easily. Instead, what happens is people often crowd right up on the edge of the luggage carousel, and then some people are left to be in the second and third rows of this situation, seeing their luggage, climbing over people, trying to pull it off of them, clanging it against old ladies' knees and other guys who are there, trying to get their luggage as quickly as they possibly can. And then it becomes a whole mess because people are getting luggage banged into them, people are trying to pick up their luggage, climbing over people and banging luggage into them, right? And we end up with this Pareto inferior outcome. Everybody would appreciate this situation better if we all just backed up 6 feet. It would work better for both of us. Everyone there would be better off. However, if everybody else does that, I would like to cheat the system. I would like to go and stand right up front so that when my luggage comes, I have it right there, I can see things more easily, and then I'm on about my way. However, if somebody else cheats the game and stands up close, well, I sit there and I say, I would like to cheat as well. Given that the other person is cheating, it's best for me to try and cheat also, as opposed to just standing back here and cooperating and trying to achieve the Pareto superior outcome. You can see examples like this of a prisoner's dilemma game all over our world where property rights are not really well defined. There's constant examples of prisoner's dilemma games when we see public goods elements from like our public goods game earlier, collusion ideas, right? You can think of different kinds of examples where this kind of action would happen. The solution concept for a prisoner's dilemma game is a strict dominance solution, and the outcome is Pareto inferior. There's lots of experimental literature on prisoner's dilemma games, and the extreme prediction of this rational choice of cheat is actually rarely borne out. People actually do cooperate, even when defection and cheating is strictly dominant. The next game is probably one you've played before, rock, paper, scissors. Here, what we want to think about is this idea of playing a mixed strategy Nash equilibria. If we're playing rock, paper, scissors, it is impossible to gain an advantage over a truly random opponent. However, there are people who, when they play rock, paper, scissors, exploit weaknesses of non-random opponents. Randomness is not the same as variety. Just playing a variety of things does not make things random. So what you have to do in a rock, paper, scissors game is you have to play a mixed strategy. A mixed strategy is a behavior that leaves your opponents indifferent from what they play. You play a mixture such that your opponents are indifferent. You make your opponents indifferent in order to eliminate behavioral patterns that they could potentially exploit. Our next game is called the Ultimatum Game. In an ultimatum game, the standard setup is such that player 1 proposes one way to divide $10 between himself and player 2. Then at stage 2 of the game, player 2 accepts or rejects the division. If he accepts, they get player 1's proposal. But if he rejects, then they both get 0. Player 1 is putting forward an ultimatum, essentially a take it or leave it type situation. We can think of this decision as player 1 offering some value or some amount, X. If player 2 accepts, then player 2 gets the amount X, and player 1 gets $10 minus that amount X. However, if player 2 rejects the offer, then player 1 gets 0 and player 2 gets 0 as well. The natural solution concept to this is dominance solvable. It seems kind of odd, but there actually is a dominant solution to this game. Using backward induction, we get a dominant solution. If you're player 2, you're always better off getting some positive sum than rejecting it. Player 2 is better off accepting any positive sum over rejecting it and getting 0. Player 1, knowing this, lowers the offer down to the lowest positive sum that is allowed from the experimental setup, say 1 cent. And so what we get is a minimal offer, and we've solved that via its dominant for player 2 to select and accept any kind of positive offer. And then knowing that, we can move backwards to stage 1 of the game and say it is best for player 1 to offer as little money as possible to player 2. And so we get some kind of solution of a minimal offer, such as $9.99 to player 1, and 1 penny to player 2. This game has received a lot of academic attention and experimental trials. Why? Well, because people often reject positive sum offers. When people are player 2 and they get something that they deem unfair, they do not always accept, even though it is a positive sum. Within the Ultimatum game, we can see some experimental results. Basically, no one plays the dominant suggested strategy, where player 1 offers a penny and takes $9.99 for himself. Even splits are quite common. In fact, this is the modal answer to the game. The average split is 60-40, with 60 going to player 1 and 40 being accepted by player 2. We also see that about 20% of people reject ungenerous offers, low offers that seem to be kind of below some threshold of, say, less than, offering $3 or $3.50 to the individual. The next classic game is a hawk-dove game. This is often used to describe international relations in terms of going to war or having peace. So we can think of international relations and areas of conflict where aggressive play may help as a hawk-dove type game. Here's a standard setup of a hawk-dove game. We can think about this basic game as kind of a game of choosing between two pure strategy Nash equilibria. We're either going to have this as an equilibria or this as an equilibria, 7-1 or 1-7, where we get hawk-dove or dove-hawk. Why would this be the case? Well, given either of these situations, say, let's look at where player 1 plays hawk and player 2 plays dove. Does player 2 want to move from this situation and play hawk also? No, they do not. So player 2 is going to stay if we are at this equilibrium. Would player 1 like to move given that we hold constant player 2's actions? Player 2 does not want, or player 1 does not want to move from 7 down to 4 either. And so both players would want to stay and we'd have a pure strategy Nash equilibria. This would also remain the case if player 1 played dove and player 2 played hawk. Within this situation, however, if both play dove, we have an outcome where, okay, they're both made, okay, fairly well off. And if they both play hawk, it's not the end of the world, but we get no benefit whatsoever. So there's two pure strategy Nash equilibria. This can be referred to as an anti-coordination game. We do not want to play these same things. Whereas before with a coordination game, we were trying to be on the diagonals. Here, the pure strategy Nash equilibria are the off diagonals. We do not want to coordinate. We'd like to not match up. Play dove-hawk or hawk-dove, doesn't matter, but let's not coordinate. It is mutually beneficial for the players to play different strategies in this game. An extreme version of the hawk-dove game is also referred to as chicken. Here we depict the classic kind of portrayal of the game of chicken of two cars heading at one another, often depicted as two male drivers trying to show off their macho-ness by staying strong and not swerving until the very last second or not at all, and having their opponent swerve and look, well, not as macho as them. In this case, we still have two pure strategy Nash equilibria. Situation where what we would like to have happen is for one of us to play hawk and the other to play dove, or for one of us to play dove and the other to play hawk, or in this case, to have one stay strong and the other swerve. And if we get either combination of that, we will have a pure strategy Nash equilibria, where holding constant the other player's actions, I do not want to change my action. Here, though, we have within this game of chicken, we often call a hawk-dove game a game of chicken when the negative payoffs from both playing aggressively are very extreme. In this case, we do not just end up with a low payment if we both play aggressively, but we end up with a very low payoff of negative 100 points. If we both played aggressively and we run into each other, we have a horrific car accident and we get these very low, terribly low negative payoffs from the situation. However, if we both just play passively, we end up with, well, not the end of the world, not so bad outcomes, right? And yet still better off than if we were the one who swerved, right? But the other person played aggressively, right? And so we're better off with the 0-0 than that situation, but man, it's way better off to both have been the chicken in this case than for both of us to have played the aggressive strategy and have coordinated on that.